Hi, this is Stacey Hausch here, and today we're actually talking with one of our book authors, Susan Bradley.
Thanks, James.
And Susan, we are actually on her veranda today, and we're at her table on her veranda. Now, Susan, I believe that you've made me a very special cup of tea today. What was the name of that?
Well, I like to call it popped rice tea.
Okay, all right.
It's a Japanese tea.
It's a Japanese tea.
So would you like?
Yes, please. Please pour me a small amount.
All right.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So I'm actually going to be having some Japanese tea today, which is, I'm just going to taste it very quickly. Now that is really good.
That's a really nice tea.
Okay. Now, Susan, let me ask you, how did you and I meet?
We met when you wandered into a clinic that I was working in, and we had a client-therapist relationship, which was really a lovely beginning.
I was a client of yours, wasn't I?
Yes.
And slowly over the years, we've become friends. And that's been amazing. Just so everyone knows, Susan and I went out last night. We saw this amazing band and had a great time dancing.
Yeah, big shout out to Kui up at Sunspace Cafe at Dunham.
All right, so we went to see Kui last night, and it was such a really good time. Now, Susan, you're a Scenar practitioner, aren't you?
That's correct.
What does that mean?
Well, the first thing I usually have to get over is how do you pronounce Scenar or Scenar? There's a lot of different devices out there that work with frequency, so that's just one, and that's the basis of how I work. I work with frequency. I work with looking at just reprogramming that chemical soup that we live in.
And you've got a Scenar device there, haven't you?
Yeah.
So this is what it looks like.
So it's often known as the Star Trek healing device. Okay. A lot of people can relate to that.
Yes.
The little scanner that gets put on people. Even if you're not a Trekkie, I think most people have this idea of the future of wellness, perhaps, where we can use frequency and energy to modify our beings.
Absolutely. Now, I liked what you were telling me about how the Scenar device works. It's about reconnecting the nervous system. Did I get that right?
Sure. There's so many different layers to these intelligent devices. I often like to talk about it as bringing things to the surface when they're ready to be brought to the surface. I actually love to work with the Scenar or the Scenar from a chronic perspective. I do tend to attract clients that have more chronic, in-depth issues, not superficial issues often, and yeah, I just find that it works really well to reprogram, reboot the system, but sometimes in a very gentle way.
Okay. And how long have you been doing this for?
I came across the Scenar device very serendipitously, just sitting at a cafe once, speaking with a lady. I watched her use it on my husband, and I was very privy to be able to see that it actually worked on a different dimension, and that's when I became very, very interested in it. It was as if I was seeing the dots reconnecting, and I just knew that it was perhaps the device for me. Up until that point in my life, I'd done massage and aromatherapy. I'd always been interested in natural therapies, but I'd never really taken anything specifically on board.
Okay. Now, this work sounds really interesting, and it actually sounds really important work. Because this particular Scenar device hasn't been around very long, and it seems to be something that most people have never heard of before.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Stacey. It actually has been around since about the 1980s space race. It has a very interesting history. It comes from Russia, um, and as I mentioned in the beginning, they're very, very intelligent devices, and I very much pay homage to the Russian scientists that created these devices. They're much more esoteric, I guess, um, which appealed to me than than I first was led, than I first acknowledged. So it's been a real journey for me to work with the Scenar, and obviously I work extensively on myself with that, and I love using it. I love using it on children. I find that the frequency resonates really gently with children's systems, and I also love using it on pets. I used to use it on my dog, and yeah, I love to be able to work with all beings.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I just want to let people know, when Susan and I first met each other all these years ago as a client therapist, um, I was almost literally carried in because I could not walk at all. My whole body had frozen up, hadn't it, Susan? And Susan gave me one session, and about an hour and a half later, I walked out of there. I walked out of her room. Now, this Scenar actually does work. It undid whatever had frozen me, and I could walk again. So I'm a huge, big fan of the Scenar, as Susan, and I think everyone should get involved with these things. Now, Susan, I've got to ask you a question. Do you have an idea of what sort of story you're going to be writing for the book?
Sure. My story is all about connecting. Um, I don't have a real basis for my story apart from um, really just letting people know that we all have such amazing potential. Um, I also very much, even on my website, I'd like to develop certain ideals, and the ideals that I really focus on are creativity, intelligence, and beauty. And I find that those three are so enmeshed and connected anyway. And so I just love to see people using their full potential. And part of coming to see me as a therapist is to allow people to expand into their amazing selves. And I very much have those ideals embedded. And I use frequency as well to try to really allow that relationship to happen. So
Okay, so the story in the book is very much going to be about transfer or connection,
sure,
human connection, isn't it?
that's correct.
Because that's where your really big passion lies, is getting each human being to connect with another human being.
Yeah, well, my background is nursing, Stacey, and I mean, as any nurse would attest to, there's no way of actually developing a healing relationship or a helping relationship with anyone unless we first have rapport and connection. So I guess for many, many years I had this sort of grounding in witnessing and observing human beings, especially when there is suffering and pain and trauma involved. A lot of my nursing was trauma, emergency medicine nursing. And so therefore, the biggest thing that I felt that I could offer on the floor was to be able to allow people to just, first of all, be comfortable in a situation, any situation, and then just to feel that connection, that human connection that we can all manifest between each other.
I can actually see you making every single patient who comes into that hospital absolutely just comfortable in their beds and calming down and relaxing, and so that, you know, they're not quite so stressed.
Sure. I had some really good learning experiences when I was just, first out. And I worked at the repatriation hospital at Greenslopes. And
Yep.
so a lot of my time was actually drawn into these conversations sitting on beds of, sitting on the foot of the bed of the old diggers that just wanted to talk. And then they'd say things to me like, can you just make sure that I get buried with my boots on? And there was little stories like that that always stuck with me within my nursing career, because wherever I was along that spectrum, I always managed to look at the humanness, the connection that is so powerful, and it's just so meaningful.
Now, I really look forward to reading your story in the book, Susan. This is going to be a very powerful story. I feel it already in my bones. A story of human connection. And before we go, Susan introduced me to what she calls a gurgle pot. Yep. Okay, now this is my little thing, and I really want every listener to hear the beautiful sound of gurgling. Yep. Now, there's a special story behind this pot.
Yep.
This pot was given to Susan by her mum, and it has a very special connection with her and her mum.
Yeah.
So just listen to this.
Okay, so this is my gurgle pot, gurgling.
Did you get that? That is the most amazing little sound. I wanted everyone to hear it. So now that we've had the experience of the gurgle pot, thank you. Thank you, Susan, very, very much for being here. And thank you for sharing a little bit about you and your essence. It's beautiful to talk to you today. And thank you for sharing your garden and your home with us. It has been magical, really, really magical. So, that will be edited out. I was doing so well. So, thank you for sharing your home and your garden with us today. And thank you for sharing your essence and a little bit about you and the story that you're going to be sharing in the book for all of these kids to read. Everybody's going to look forward to hearing your story, and I know that they're going to be feeling really curious right at the moment, going, I really want to know more about Susan, and I really got to hear her story. So thank you everyone for listening, and I will talk to you again in another interview.